He was choking to death in a room full of people, and not one of them moved. Forks froze midair, laughter died, and every pair of eyes turned toward the man in the gray suit. His face went red and purple, hands clawing at his throat. The billionaire couldn't breathe, and the world just stared, until the black waitress dropped her tray and ran. If you were standing there, would you have moved? Comment where you're watching from, and let's see who still believes courage is louder than fear. Plates clattered as she pushed through the aisle. "Move!" she shouted, but nobody did. Her shoes crunched on broken glass. The man's eyes rolled back. She wrapped her arms around him. One quick thrust. Nothing. Another. Then the third. A piece of steak shot out, sliding across the floor. The man collapsed forward, gasping for air. For a full second, silence ruled the diner. Then someone clapped. Then another. The applause felt wrong, like guilt wearing gratitude's mask. Keisha Daniels stepped back, chest heaving, palms trembling. The paramedics stormed in, lights flashing red across her face. She moved aside, letting them through, her heart still drumming in her ears. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of them asked. She nodded. "He's breathing." As they lifted the man onto the stretcher, she caught a whisper from a corner booth. "That's Ethan Whitaker, the Whitaker." The name echoed through her mind. She had seen it in magazines, on skyscrapers, next to stories about mergers she didn't understand. And now, she had his life in her hands only minutes ago. Outside, rain slicked the street. She sat on the curb wrapped in a foil blanket, watching the ambulance lights fade into the city. People passed by, phones raised, filming her face. A stranger said, "You're going viral right now." She didn't answer. In her lap lay her name tag, Keisha Daniels, bent from the fall. She traced the letters with her thumb, whispering to herself, "You just save a man. Don't let them turn it into something else." The door of the diner swung open. A young reporter pointed his camera at her. "Miss, how does it feel to save Ethan Whitaker's life?" She stood slowly. "It feels like work. Can we get your picture?" No, she turned away. Behind her, flashes burst anyway. Walking home, her shoes soaked, her phone buzzing nonstop in her pocket. Keisha tried not to think about what tomorrow would bring. Maybe it would all blow over. Maybe not. But deep down, she knew the truth. The story wasn't about the man she saved. It was about the color of the hands that saved him. She reached her apartment, climbed the narrow stairs, and leaned against the door before opening it. The quiet inside felt heavy. Zuri was asleep on the couch, cartoons still flickering on mute. Keisha brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead and whispered, "Mommy did something good today." She hung her wet apron on the chair and stared out the window at the city lights. Down the block, neon signs blinked like camera flashes. Somewhere, someone was already typing a headline. She didn't want fame. She wanted tomorrow to feel normal again. But deep down she knew, once the world sees you through a label, it never forgets. Keisha poured herself a glass of water and sat by the window. Her reflection looked back, tired, proud, scared. She whispered, "You did what was right. That has to be enough." Outside, thunder rolled far away, soft but sure, like a warning. The first raindrops hit the glass. She didn't move. The world had stopped once tonight. Next time, maybe it would move with her. They called her a hero, but the headlines called her something else. Black waitress saves white billionaire in Atlanta diner. Not woman saves life. Not courage under pressure. Just labels. Black, white waitress billionaire. By sunrise, Keisha Daniels wasn't a person anymore. She was a headline. Keisha's phone buzzed nonstop, lighting the dark apartment like a broken strobe. Videos, tags, mentions, her face everywhere. Someone had recorded everything. The clip looped online. A black waitress running toward a dying man, while everyone else stood still. Her daughter, Zuri, peeked from the couch. "Mommy, you're on TV." Keisha rubbed her eyes and looked up at the screen. An anchor smiled too wide. A heroic act from a diner employee last night. The black waitress credited with saving business magnate Ethan Whitaker. Black waitress. That's all they saw. The woman behind it disappeared beneath a headline. Her phone rang again, unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, but a text followed. Mr. Whitaker would like to meet you in private to thank you. She stared at the message. Why him? Why now? Was this about gratitude or damage control? By midday, the story had spread everywhere. She scrolled through comments until her heart hurt. She did it for clout. Watch. She'll ask for money. Just another race stunt. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. Zuri came running with a drawing of a superhero holding a baby. That's you, Mommy. You save people. Keisha forced a smile. Thanks, baby. Her voice cracked. Go wash your hand for dinner. When Zuri left the room, Keisha whispered to herself, heroes don't cry this much. At the diner, her boss Wade pulled her aside. Reporters waited outside, microphones ready. I can't have this mess, Keisha. People come here to eat, not to be on TV. I didn't ask for it, she said. He handed her an envelope. Take a few days off until it dies down. Her stomach twisted. You're suspending me for saving someone's life. I'm protecting the business. Outside, she could hear camera clicks through the glass. The world saw a headline. Her boss saw a problem. She saw the truth. Being a black woman with courage came with a price. That night she walked home through rain. Hood pulled tight. Puddles reflected neon and shame. On a street corner, two men argued about her story. Man, she just wanted attention. Yeah, bet the billionaire gonna hire her now. She kept walking, hands in pockets, pretending she didn't hear. At home, the TV still played her face. Clips from talk shows, hashtags, analysis. They dissected her skin tone, her accent, her posture. Not one of them said her name right. Keisha stood at the window, city lights blurred by rain. She thought about the moment in the diner, how simple it had been. Man can't breathe. Help him. Now the whole world was choking on its own bias. Her phone buzzed again, the same number. She answered this time. Ms. Daniels, a woman's voice. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Whitaker. He'd like to meet tomorrow. No press. No press. Keisha echoed. Just him. Keisha looked at the rain on her window. Maybe this was her chance to get answers, or just some respect. Tell him, she said, if he really wants to thank me. Come without a camera. She hung up, turned off the TV, and sat beside Zuri, who had fallen asleep mid-drawing. The crayon in her small hand left a blue smudge on the page, a sky, unfinished. Keisha tucked her in and whispered, I'll finish it tomorrow. Outside, sirens whined in the distance. Somewhere, a headline flashed again. But this time she didn't look. She was done reading what the world thought of her. Tomorrow, she'd find out what the world's most powerful man thought instead. Rain slid down the tall glass towers of downtown Atlanta as Keisha stepped off the bus. Her palms were sweating, the cheap jacket she borrowed clinging to her shoulders. In her pocket, the text glowed again, no press. Just me, she whispered under her breath. You better mean that. Inside Whitaker Tower, everything shone too bright. Marble floors, gold logos, perfume instead of coffee. People in suits glanced up, then away. The way people look at someone who doesn't belong. She lifted her chin higher. She'd already stood in front of death. A lobby couldn't scare her. The elevator opened to the top floor with a quiet chime. Ethan Whitaker waited near a wall of windows, skyline stretching behind him like money made visible. No cameras, no assistants, just him. Ms. Daniels, he said softly, thank you for coming. Keisha kept her arms crossed. You said it was private. I needed to see if you meant it. I did, he replied. Please sit. She didn't. I don't plan on staying long. He smiled faintly. Then I'll talk fast. You saved my life. I've had weeks to think about it, and none of it makes sense. It wasn't supposed to, she said. You choked. I helped. End of story. Not for me, he said. I've had 1,000 people help me make money. No one's ever helped me live. Keisha's throat tightened, but she kept her tone flat. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, he said quietly. That's why I needed to see you. He gestured toward the table. Blueprints, notes, sketches of classrooms and community centers covered the surface. "What is this?" she asked. "Something new," he said. "Free CPR and first aid training in every low-income neighborhood in the city. I want you to lead it." She blinked. "Me?" "You already did," he said. "That night." Keisha laughed, short and sharp. "You think I'm your poster girl?" "No thanks." "It's not a campaign," Ethan said. "It's a correction." She studied him for a long moment. "You don't know me, Mr. Whitaker. You don't know what happens when a black woman stands next to someone like you. The world doesn't see partnership. It sees charity." He nodded. "Then we'll change what the world sees." "Just like that?" she said. "Just like that," he answered. "I have resources. You have truth. Combine them." Keisha turned to the window. Down below, the city looked small. Buses crawling, people rushing, lives colliding. She thought about Zuri, about rent, about Wade telling her to cool off. Maybe change didn't come from waiting. Maybe it came from walking straight into rooms that told you not to enter. She finally spoke. "If I do this, it's my way. No cameras, no token speeches, no charity galas." Ethan smiled. "Deal." "Don't smile yet," she said. "You might hate how real it gets." He leaned back. "Real is exactly what I need." Keisha reached for one of the blueprints. Her hand stopped shaking. "Then let's start with the neighborhoods nobody visits unless they're lost. I'll fund every city you want," he said. She looked at him, half amused. "Careful. I might test you." "I hope you do," he replied. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was grounding. Two people from different worlds realizing they both wanted to breathe easier. Finally, she extended her hand. "You can stop calling me Ms. Daniels." He took it gently. "Then what should I call you?" "Keisha," she said, "the woman who doesn't freeze." He smiled. "Ethan," he replied, "the man learning how not to." They shook once, firm, equal, final. When she stepped back into the elevator, Keisha looked at her reflection in the mirrored wall. Same woman, same uniform, but something in her eyes had changed. Maybe confidence, maybe fire. Downstairs, she walked out into the drizzle and pulled her hood up. The city lights looked softer now, the noise less cruel. She whispered to herself, "You said you'd move when others freeze. Guess it's time to prove it." Behind her, 30 floors up, Ethan watched through the rain-streaked window, and for the first time since that night, both of them could finally breathe. No press, no assistants, just me. That's all the message said. 5 words glowing on her cracked phone screen, refusing to leave her head. Keisha had saved a billionaire's life and lost her own peace. Now he wanted to meet again, alone. What did he really want this time? Gratitude, guilt, or redemption? Before we find out, tap subscribe if you believe real courage deserves to be heard, not hidden. 3 days later, she stood in front of her mirror, tugging at the collar of a plain white shirt. "Just talk," she muttered. "Then leave." Zuri peeked in, eyes wide. "You meeting the rich man again?" Keisha smiled. "Yeah, he wants to talk about something." "Be nice," the girl whispered. "But not too nice." Keisha laughed. "Exactly." Inside Whitaker Tower, the elevator climbed in silence. When the doors opened, Ethan was already waiting. No tie, no team, just a table covered in sketches. He looked up. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't," she said. "Didn't want to be anyone's headline again." "I get it," he replied. "That's why it's only us." He slid a folder toward her. "I've been planning something. Free CPR and first aid training in neighborhoods that never get funding. You start it, I back it." Keisha frowned. "You wanted to run a program? I pour coffee, Ethan." "You act when others freeze," he said. "That's leadership." She folded her arms. "People will think you're saving me." He shook his head. "You already saved me. Now we save others." Keisha paced the room. "This world doesn't like people like me next to people like you." "Then we'll show them why it should," he answered. She stopped, watching him carefully. There was no PR crew, No hidden agenda in his face. Just a man who looked tired pretending. "Fine," she said. "But no cameras, no charity galas, no photo ops." He nodded. "Deal." Keisha looked down at the plans again. Buildings, classrooms, hands drawn on paper. Each line felt bigger than her. "Why call it breathe again?" she asked. "Because that's what you gave me," he said softly. For the first time, she didn't argue. Weeks passed like chapters. They visited old gyms, schools with leaking ceilings, neighborhoods long forgotten by city budgets. Everywhere they went, Keisha spoke to crowds that actually listened. Everywhere, she repeated the same line. "Fear kills faster than anything. When someone needs help, move." The video spread quietly. Not tabloids this time, but people sharing hope. "See her," they said. "That's the woman from the diner. She's still helping." One night, as they closed the office, Ethan asked, "Do you ever regret stepping in that night?" She thought for a moment. "Only when I see the headlines. Never when I see the faces." He smiled. Then it was worth it. Keisha looked around the empty space. A folding table, 2 laptops, a wall full of sticky notes. "Doesn't look like much," she said. Ethan turned off the light. "Everything big starts small." Outside, the city hummed. She walked home through drizzle. Folder clutched to her chest. Each streetlight reflected in puddles like stars trying to rise from the ground. Her phone buzzed, a new notification. Trending. She chuckled. Guess people are finally breathing. At home, Zuri was asleep on the couch, crayons scattered around. On the paper was a drawing. 2 people standing in front of a building with the words "Breathe Again" written in crooked letters. One figure had curly hair and brown skin. The other wore a suit and held her hand. Keisha traced the drawing with a smile. "Looks like Mommy's got work to do." She placed the picture beside the folder, switched off the light, and whispered, "Fear had its chance. My turn now." Ethan sat in his penthouse, watching the rain slide down the window. He replayed a short clip on his phone. Keisha teaching a room full of children how to save a life. Her voice echoed through the speaker. "Don't freeze. Move." He smiled, closed the phone, and whispered, "Yes, ma'am." That night, thunder rolled across Atlanta again, not warning this time, but applause. Somewhere between wealth and struggle, between power and purpose, 2 people had found the same rhythm, and the world had started to move with them. The box came on a Tuesday morning. No return address, just her name written in red ink. Keisha tore the tape open and froze. Inside lay the broken face of a CPR dummy, its head split clean down the middle, plastic shards glittering like teeth. A note rested on top, scrawled in thick black marker. "Go back to pouring coffee, hero." For the first time since that diner night, her hands trembled. The Breathe Again project had barely started, but it was already stirring up noise. Every community session filled faster than the last. Kids learning, parents cheering, neighborhoods alive again. But for every smile she saw, there were whispers waiting in the dark. Online, hate piled up like trash. Under every post, strangers spat venom. "She's using him." "Rich man's charity case." "Bet she's milking it." Keisha stopped reading, but the noise didn't stop reading her. That morning, she snapped a photo of the box and sent it to Ethan. Within minutes, his call came through. "Keisha, what happened?" "Just some mail," she said quietly. "What kind?" "The kind that tells you you're getting too loud." He was silent for a moment. "I'll hire security." "Don't," she said sharply. "I don't need protection. I need people to care. Caring won't stop threats. Neither will silence." She hung up. Her heart was still pounding, but her fear had teeth now, sharp enough to fight back. 2 days later, she arrived at the rec center to find shattered glass on the floor. Someone had thrown bricks through the windows. Police cars flashed blue and red outside, officers scribbling reports they didn't mean to solve. A little boy stood near the door, eyes wide. "Miss Keisha, they said you should quit," he whispered. She crouched down, brushed glass from his sneakers. "Who said that?" "Some men in a truck. Said you're causing trouble." Keisha smiled faintly. "You know what trouble is?" He shook his head. "Trouble's what people call truth when it scares them." The boy blinked, then smiled back. "So we don't quit?" She shook her head. "We don't even slow down." That night, she stayed late, sweeping glass into piles. The sound of the broom scraping the floor echoed through the empty hall. When Ethan walked in, she didn't look up. "You should have called me," he said quietly. "I didn't want pity." "This isn't pity." "Then what is it?" "Partnership," he said. She stopped sweeping. "Partnership's easy when you're safe, Ethan. I walk home past that dumpster every night." He hesitated. "I can move you two. Don't buy me comfort," she cut in. "Buy me equality." They locked eyes. Then Ethan nodded. "Then we'll rebuild bigger." Keisha smiled. "Now you're talking." The next morning, the news tried to twist it again. Controversy at Breathe Again Center, vandalism under investigation. But Keisha refused to play victim. She posted one photo, herself, standing in front of the broken window, broom in hand. Caption, "We don't stop breathing because others choke on hate." The picture exploded online. People began showing up with gloves, trash bags, donations. A local church offered its basement. A construction company repaired the glass for free. Even the mayor reposted it. Courage is contagious. Keisha read every message that night, not the hate, but the hope. She whispered to herself, "They wanted to scare me quiet. They made me louder." But threats didn't disappear overnight. Some came by phone, others by mail, some through the eyes of people passing her on the street. One voicemail hissed, "You think saving a rich man makes you equal? You'll always be what you were." She listened once, deleted it, and whispered, "What I was saved him. What I am will save others." Ethan found her at the new training site 2 days later. A bigger center, fresh paint, sunlight on every wall. "You ready?" he asked. "Always." She stepped up to the mic before a crowd of volunteers. "Some people said we should stop," she began. "But when someone's dying, do you stop?" The crowd shouted back, "No." "Exactly," she said. "So neither will we." The applause rose, loud and proud. Zuri clapped in the front row, smile wide, pride glowing brighter than the lights. Keisha looked out the crowd, every color, every face. Her voice softened. "Hate is noise, but courage echoes." The cheers grew louder. The broken windows of last week were just memories now, replaced by glass, so clear she could see the sky through it. As she stepped off stage, Ethan met her with a quiet smile. "They tried to break it," he said. "They only made it shine," she replied. And for the first time in a long while, Keisha felt something rare, not fear, not anger, but peace carved out of defiance. The City Hall Plaza was packed shoulder to shoulder, umbrellas closed despite the drizzle. People held homemade signs that read, "Breathe again and move when it matters." TV vans lined the streets, reporters whispering into microphones as the crowd waited for her. For once, the world wasn't watching her judge. It was waiting to listen. Keisha Daniels stood behind the curtain, hands trembling around a few folded cards. Through the noise, she heard a child's voice call, "We love you, Miss Keisha." She smiled softly, then glanced at Ethan standing nearby. He nodded. No words, just quiet faith. The mayor took the mic first. "Tonight, we honor a woman who reminded the city that courage doesn't wear a suit." Applause thundered. Keisha's stomach flipped. She whispered to herself, "Don't freeze now." When her name was called, she stepped into the rain and onto the stage. For a heartbeat, the noise vanished. All she heard was her own breath. 3 months ago, she began, "I was a waitress trying to pay rent. One night, someone stopped breathing, and a room full of people froze. Except me." Her voice echoed off the marble buildings around her. "I didn't move because I was brave. I moved because I couldn't watch someone die while everyone waited for permission to care." The crowd fell silent. "Since then, I've heard the same question over and over. Why did you do it?" She paused. "Because that's what humanity looks like. Not color, not class, just humanity." Applause rippled through the crowd, small at first, then rolling louder. Keisha lifted her eyes to the cameras. "I was called a hero. Then they call me something else, the black waitress who saved a white billionaire. Funny how they never just say woman saves man. The audience murmured in agreement. She smiled sadly. That's why this program exists, to teach people how to save lives, but also how to see each other. Rain began to fall harder, cold drops on her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. Some folks sent hate. Some broke our windows. But we rebuilt them with more hands, more hearts, and more hope. The crowd clapped, voices shouting her name now. Keisha! Keisha! She raised her hand for quiet. Hate wants you silent. Fear wants you frozen. But when someone needs help, you move. That's what this is about. Movement. Real messy, unstoppable movement. The thunder rolled again, low but steady. Keisha looked up at the storm. If rain can fall on all of us the same, maybe it's trying to teach us something. The applause turned into cheers. Cameras flashed. Reporters mouthed, "Wow." After the speech, Ethan joined her backstage. He was soaked, smiling like he hadn't in years. "You changed the city tonight," he said. She laughed softly. "No, the city just remembered how to breathe." He handed her a towel. "You're going viral again." She rolled her eyes. "As long as they spell my name right this time." They both laughed, the kind that only comes after surviving storms. A little boy ran up with a phone in his hand. "Miss Keisha, we watched you on live. My whole school did CPR today. Because of you." She knelt, hugging him. "Then you're already the real hero, baby." The boy grinned and ran off, waving. Ethan watched quietly, voice low. "That's your legacy." Keisha wiped her eyes. "No," she said. "That's our future." That night, the footage played on every network. Not just the speech, the emotion. A woman, drenched in rain, standing tall while a crowd of strangers clapped like a heartbeat. Across the city, people stopped scrolling and started feeling. Firefighters reposted her words. Nurses shared clips. One caption said, "She didn't wait for change. She became it." In a small diner on the east side, an older waitress wiped the table and whispered to TV. About time they listened. At home, Zuri sat cross-legged on the couch, eyes wide as her mother filled the screen. "That's my mommy," she whispered proudly. Keisha stood on her balcony, hair still damp, the city glowing below. For the first time in months, she didn't feel watched. She felt seen. And in that silence between thunder and applause, she knew the city finally heard her heartbeat. The applause had faded, but its echo still lived in the city streets. Store windows carried stickers that read, "Breathe again." Murals showed strangers helping strangers. And for once, headlines didn't need to remind anyone what color the hero was. Keisha Daniels walked into the same diner where everything had started. It looked different now. New paint, new owner, same smell of coffee and grease. The waitress behind the counter smiled wide. "Oh my God, you're her? You're the reason I signed up for CPR training." Keisha laughed softly. "That's good. Means it's working." She sat in the booth by the window, the same one where she used to watch her reflection, and dream of a life that wasn't just surviving. Now, the city outside didn't feel so heavy. The waitress came over. "Coffee, please." As she poured, she asked, "What does it feel like?" Starting a movement. Keisha looked at the rising steam and said quietly, "It feels like breathing after being underwater too long." Across town, Ethan Whitaker stood before a line of reporters. He'd turned down magazine covers and TV exclusives. Instead, he held a small press conference at a school gym, the same one where Keisha taught her first session. "This," he said, gesturing toward a group of kids practicing chest compressions, "is her legacy." A woman who didn't ask for permission to help. She just did. He stepped back, leaving the spotlight for others to take. Because this wasn't about saving face anymore. It was about saving lives. That night, Keisha came home late. Zuri sat on the floor with papers scattered everywhere. Homework. Keisha asked, sort of. Zuri grinned. "We had to write about someone who inspires us." Keisha picked up the page and froze. At the top, in blue crayon, her daughter had written, My mom taught the world to move. Her eyes burned, but she smiled. Looks like you just got an A, she whispered. Zuri leaned against her shoulder. Mommy? Yeah. Are you ever scared? Keisha thought for a long moment. All the time. Then why do you still help people? She smiled. Because scared people still have hands. And hearts. Later, Keisha met Ethan at the new foundation office, a converted firehouse painted with a mural of hands reaching upward. The words, if you can help, move, stretched across the wall in bold white letters. He looked around the room and said, You built this out of chaos. She smirked. No, we built out of courage. He nodded. Same thing, sometimes. She walked to the window, watching volunteers packing first aid kits in the courtyard. It's strange, she said. I spent years serving tables, waiting for tips. Now people call me a leader. Ethan smiled. You always were one. You just didn't have a stage yet. Keisha turned back, eyes soft. You could have kept this quiet, donated, smiled, and gone home. I tried that my whole life, he said. Didn't change a thing. She laughed lightly. Guess we both stopped waiting. He nodded, from waitress to movement. She grinned, from silence to purpose. The camera of the city fades out. A white nurse and a black teenager practicing CPR in a school gym. A police officer learning from a single mother. A teacher hanging a Breathe Again poster on a classroom wall. And a city once divided, now learning to move together. Keisha walks down the street at sunset, wind in her hair, coffee cup in hand. For the first time, no one's staring. No one's whispering. They're smiling and moving. At the next corner, a little girl waves from across the road. Keisha waves back. The girl shouts, You're the lady who helps people. Keisha laughs. We all can, baby. We just have to move. She keeps walking as the sun dips behind the buildings, painting the sky gold. And in that light, she looks less like a waitress and more like what she become, a woman who turned fear into a future. If this story touched your heart, share it right now. Tell us where you're watching from. Because one voice, one act, one choice can still change the world. And remember, when someone needs help, move.